So we're going to start a little different today. I'm going to start more with a fast-paced, not a fast pace, but more going right into the flow and then slowing it down. So kind of the opposite of how I normally, but whether we don't want to go right into it. So we're going to start in child's pose. So toes touch, knees wide. Sit your hips back towards your heels and reach your arms forward. So you can rest with your forehead on the floor if that's comfortable. You can also take the option to prop it up on a blanket, a pillow, or a block. We're not trying to get into any deep expression of child's pose, just a place to land, to sense, to feel the body. If it's comfortable or sounds interesting to you, you can gently sway your hips side to side or roll the forehead back and forth on the ground. Feeling connected. Feeling connected to the surroundings, so the ground. Perhaps noticing your surroundings, any sounds that you may hear. Connecting to your own body and being curious about stillness or slight movements and what it is that your body needs in order to come into the present. So many times we're asked to stay still, but one of the things that I have been discovering is that for me, just a gentle rock is what brings me into the present. Sometimes feeling movement and feeling how slight movements, specifically in this pose, in my spine and in my knees and my hips, actually makes me release a little bit more than just being asked to be still. So we all have kind of preferences, and there are preferences and they're right. Shift forward to hands and knees. Tuck your toes under. Just one round through cat and cow. Inhale, lift your head, lift your tailbone. Notice the shape of your spine, the dip. And then on your next exhalation, round your spine. So moving into flexion. So cow pose is extension, it's a back bend, and cat pose is flexion of the spine, kind of like a forward fold. And coming into neutral, somewhere between your cat and your cow. Lift your knees off the floor and move your hips up and back in space, coming into a downward facing dog. And again, option here to remain still and just sense your body and your breath. The other option is to gently bend the knee, send the opposite heel towards the floor. Whatever option you decide, I invite you to kind of notice how your hamstrings feel, so the backs of your legs. Last week, we really kind of honed in on that connection between the engagement of the front of your thigh, as well as the engagement of the back of your thigh, so your quads and your hamstrings, to create a strong and stable base in Tadasana, which is called mountain pose, a strong and stable object, mountain. Slowly walk your hands back towards your feet halfway, and then walk your feet to meet your hands. Feet about hip distance apart, bend your knees forward as you come into a neutral spine. So gazing towards the front of your mat, sending your hips towards the back of your mat. And from this bent knee position and spine long position, straighten your legs to come to a standing position. So we're going to go through, and I'm going to adjust my screen so that you can actually see me. And we're going to go through some sun salutations. We'll warm up to them. So start at the front of your mat. Your feet can be up to hip distance apart or together. And for these first couple of rounds of sun salutation, we're not going to really focus too much on alignment. We're just more or less focusing on moving. So hands starting beside your hips. Rotate your palms out. With an inhale, reach your arms over your head, gaze up towards your hands. Either knees bent or legs straight. Hinge from your hips, sending your hips back as you release the crown of your head towards the floor. So coming into a forward fold, Uttanasana. Bring your hands to your shins. Come up halfway where your spine is parallel to the floor. And exhale, fold again. We're just doing a few half salutations first. So as you inhale, stand up, reach up, stretch up, gaze up, and bring your hands beside your thighs, Tadasana. So just a couple of more like this. Turn the palms out. Inhale, reach your arms up, gaze up towards your hands. As you exhale, either knees bent or straight, hinge from your hips, fold into Uttanasana, forward fold. Inhale, hands to your shins, spine parallel to the floor, reach the head and the hips in opposite directions. Exhale, hinge and fold. One more time. Inhale, reach up, stretch up, arms come over your head, gaze up. Exhale, hands beside your thighs. Turn the palms out. Inhale, reach up, stretch up. It's called Urva Namaskar. Exhale, hinge from your hips, fold into Uttanasana, forward fold. Hands to your shins, spine parallel to the floor, Ardha Uttanasana. Exhale and fold into Uttanasana and pause here. Bend your knees. Move your spine into flexion. So move the spine kind of more into that cat pose and drop your head towards the floor. Then bending, keeping your spine in this flexed position, start to move the knees towards straight and just noticing your hamstrings. So what do your hamstrings feel like today? Is there resistance? Can you add kind of that awareness that we introduced last week of firming the fronts of the thighs as if the muscles were hugging the bones to lift the tops of the thighs, pushing a little bit more through your right heel backwards to engage the hamstring, and then the left thigh. Release a little deeper. Inhale, come up halfway. Bend your knees, hands to the floor. Step to the back of your mat, plank pose. Firm the fronts of your thighs as if the muscles were hugging the bones. Then drop your knees to the floor. Point the toes back. And then lift the feet off the floor. So coming onto your knees. And lower down towards the floor, elbows reaching towards your hips. Lower the fronts of your shins to the floor. Lift the shoulders, heads of the shoulders away from the floor. Inhale, just lift the head and chest up to a comfortable place in cobra pose and down. Inhale again, lift up to cobra, so lifting head, chest, then pressing down with the hands. Exhale, release. One more time, inhale. Lift head, lift chest away from the floor. Bend your knees. Tuck your toes under and lift the hips up and back into downward facing dog. So again, opting either for stillness or for movement. But again, awareness on your thighs, the backs of your thighs, and awareness on your spine. And breathing normally, naturally. Lift up onto both of your toes, gaze forward, walk the feet halfway up, drop the heels down, walk the hands back to the feet. Inhale, hands to shins, Ardha Uttanasana. Exhale, fold, forward fold, Uttanasana. Press down through your feet. Reach up, stretch up, come up, gaze up. And release your hands to your thighs, Tadasana. So I'm going to watch you do this as I talk you through it. So come to the front of your mat. I just kind of want to see what's going on. So starting in Tadasana, rotate your palms away from your body. With an inhale, reach your arms over your head, gaze up towards your hands. Move the tops of the thighs back, firming the thighs, hinge from your hips, fold forward, forward fold, or Uttanasana. Inhale, come up halfway, hands to your shins. Firm the front of your thighs as if you are lifting the kneecaps with the thigh muscles. As you exhale, release, hinge from your hips, reach the head towards the floor, hands to the ground. Step to the back of the mat into plank pose and pause just for a moment, firming the fronts of the thighs, lifting the kneecaps with the thighs, then release the knees to the floor, point the toes back, and bend your heels towards your hips. Lower down, elbows reach towards your hips as you lower your chest down towards the ground. Lift the heads of the shoulders away from the floor. So broaden across the front of your chest, palms lightly on the floor. Lift your head, lift your chest. Once they're lifted, press down through your hands. Yep. Exhale, lower down 2 more times. So finding the lift first in your head, letting the chest follow. The hands are the last things to push down to find more of the extension. Good. Release back down. And one more time, feel the lift of the head away from the floor, chest away from the floor, then hands press down, lift. Come up through hands and knees. Tuck your toes under, lift up and back into downward facing dog. Either stillness or bending one knee and then the other. And I am seeing what I'm looking for as we start to move through this class. So in your body, in your mind, kind of make that connection between what you feel going on in your spine. Like, what do you notice? We talk a lot about the curves of your spine. What do you notice about the curves of your spine? And you don't have to try to fix it, just notice it. Also noticing your hamstrings. We worked a lot last week on kind of creating some awareness of how we can create more space in our hamstrings by actually engaging them eccentrically. Okay, come down onto your knees, grab your belts, and come onto your back. So last week, we really focused on that relationship between the quads, which are the fronts of your thighs, and the hamstrings, which are the backs of your thighs. And the hopefully realization that as you engaged one, the other actually lengthened. And as you engage that, the hamstring specifically, you would find even more length in the hamstring. So we're going to kind of continue with that, as well as bringing the spine into the conversation. So with your knees bent, I'm going to move my little camera again, come onto your back. We're not going to use the belt right away, but we will move to it. So heels of the hands, or first, use your fingertips to find your hip points. So at the front of your hips, I've heard these called headlights, and I don't know, when you say headlights, everybody goes, oh, those bones. So if that works for you, they're there. It's kind of facing forward, bony hip points. And then remove the heels of your hands to replace where your fingertips are, and take the pads of your fingers down
to the lower belly. So right where it rests on your pubic bone. We're going to move the spine first into flexion, which means we're going to take the pelvis into a posterior tilt. So post is behind, right? So we're focusing on the back of our body. So if you're moving the pelvis in the direction of your back of your body, you're moving the lower back towards the floor. So we have been moving away from this. I want you to exaggerate this now. So move your spine towards the floor, push it into the floor, and then lift your head and look down. And if you look down, you can see that your fingertips that are on your pubic bone are higher than the heels of the hands that are on the hip points. So just notice that and put your head back down. So this is the lumbar spine and flexion. And we want some flexion in the lumbar spine when we need it. So exaggerate it a little bit more, lifting the pubic bone up towards your rib cage. And then go into the opposite of that. So now arch your lower back away from the floor, and we're moving now into an anterior tilt. So as we start to lift the spine off the floor, you'll feel the hip points start to move towards the tops of your thighs. And then again, lift your head to look down, and now you can't even see your fingers. So now the hip points are resting higher than your pubic bone. Bring your head down. And now with the sensation of both of those in your mind, see if you can find neutral. So where your hip points, where the heels of your hands are, and your fingertips where your pubic bone is, bring them into a neutral plane. And lift and look down, see if it's kind of in that neutral range. And then just to check, slide one of your hands under your lower back. So this is your natural curve. This is the natural spine. And our natural spine is not flat. So we're not trying to flatten our low back. You may also notice that the core is somewhat toned in this position. Drawing lower ribs in towards the midline and down towards the hips, creating that sense of a corset in the front. Then take your belts. Take it in both hands. Stretch your left leg long to the ground. Check to make sure you've kept your neutral spine. You either point your toes or flex your ankle, but lift your head and look down at your foot and notice if your foot is pointing straight up. And that's what you want, right? So even if the toes pointed instead of flexed, it's not rolling open. So we're maintaining neutral in the left leg. Bend your right knee in and wrap the belts around your foot and stretch the leg long. So as you come into this position, notice what's happened to your spine and try to refine that natural curve. Then look at your right foot. Using your belt, pull the foot down towards your head more. And then as if you were the back of your heel was at a wall, press the back of the heel towards that imaginary wall and then stretch it up the wall. Pull your foot away from your belt towards your head. And again, push the heel as if that imaginary wall is there and reach it up. So reviewing what we did last week. So keeping the tone that you've just created in your thigh. Now move your pelvis into that posterior as you flex your spine and lift your head and your chest off the floor. So now we're going into flexion in the spine. Look down at your left foot. Notice if the foot has started to roll out and roll your inner thigh in. Pull the belt into the foot and then pull the foot off the belt as you push the heel into that imaginary wall and reach it up the wall. Flex up the spine a little bit more. Release head and shoulders to the ground. Keep your right leg strong. Release the belt. Keep the tone in the front of the thigh as you slowly come back into the neutral pelvis. So lower back is off the floor. You use the core to slowly return the foot to the ground. You can bring the heels to your hip points again, fingertips to your pubic bone. See if you still have that neutral pelvis, so low back is off the floor. Grab your belt, bend your left knee, and wrap the belt around your foot. Bring your right hand to your right pelvis in this position. Notice if the pubic bone or the hip point is higher and bring it into that neutral. Low back is off the floor. Right thigh is rolling slightly in to keep that leg in neutral. And then begin to pull the ball of your foot down with the belt, reaching your toes towards your head. Imagine the imaginary wall at the back of your heel. So not the bottom of your heel, but the back of the heel. Push it as if there was a wall there. And then as if you were stretching the heel up the wall. Notice your pelvis and moving the pelvis into anterior. So as if you're taking your hip point towards your thigh, curl up, moving into flexion. Keep reaching the heel up the wall as you push the heel into the imaginary wall. Look down at your right foot. Notice what that foot's doing. Notice the front of your left thigh. The more you pull the foot out of the belt, the more engagement you get in the front of your thigh. Release your head. Release the belt. Keep the belt or keep the leg strong. Find the neutral pelvis again, any of those ways. And then slowly, with the leg remaining firm, release the heel back down to the floor. Tadasana in both of the legs. So toes moving up towards the heels, back to the heels pressing into the floor, and then reaching down as if you could take the backs of your thighs to touch the floor. Find your neutral pelvis. Good. Let it go. Bend your knees. Roll to either side and come up. So we're going to go to the wall. So that pose, if you think about relationships to gravity, that pose is downward facing dog, right? Just lying on your back. Or also that half forward fold, that Ardha Uttanasana. So you're going to come to the wall with your hands at about hip distance apart. And you don't have to have them flat. It's more of just noticing where your hips are. So heels of the hands in line with the tops of your hips, then walk back. And now we're coming into down dog at the wall. So hands press into the wall, feet are hip distance apart, and heels are below your hips. We're going to move into that flexed spine. So an anterior tilt of your pelvis, posterior tilt of your pelvis. So moving your hip points away from your thighs, take your hand and place it on your lower back. Feel how the spine moves up into your hand. And then create the opposite. So go more into that exaggerated anterior tilt, trying to pull the spine out and move the hip points towards your thighs. And then bring the hand back to the wall and find neutral. And one of the things that you notice, and I think you can see me, if I move into that interior tilt, my ribs tend to want to go as well. So part of what helps to find the anterior or the neutral is to corset the lower ribs in and draw them towards the spine. Lift your toes off the ground. Press the ball mount of your big toe down, pinky toe down. Push the heels back as you push the hands into the wall. Keep the natural tilt of your spine and breathe. Firm the fronts of your thighs. Bend your knees, walk your feet in. Come up. And now coming into hands and knees with your feet on the wall. So toes are tucked under, heels are on the wall. So moving into a position where you can find the foot flat on the wall if that's possible. Hands underneath your shoulders. Walk your hands slightly forward of your shoulders and then shift your hips forward a bit. Find neutral, first find that flexed spine. So posterior tilt of the pelvis. You can check to see the rounding, the flexing of your spine. And then again, reverse that. So really move into that deep extension of your spine, moving first with your hip points towards your thighs, noticing what happens to your lower rib cage to create that. And then notice how it feels to corset the ribs in first and how that helps to find neutral spine. So again, we have a slight curve in our lower back. Good, Lisa, I can see you find that. Good. Press down through your hands. Push the hands in towards each other, and then keep that awareness as you twist your hands, not really, but as if you were twisting your hands apart. And notice your biceps face forward. Keep that and now move into downward facing dog with your feet on the wall. And I'm going to come out of this and watch you. And I think I can see both of you pretty well. So Lisa, walk your hands forward a little bit. And I know rooms sometimes give us less options. Good. Now, again, move into that flexed position. So a posterior tilt. So finding more rounding in the spine. So exaggerating the rounding. And then go in the opposite and try to find more of that anterior tilt. So pushing your head towards the floor, pushing your rib cage towards your thighs, and trying to create that cow pose in your lower back. Press your heel into the wall. And then as if you were dragging the heels or pushing the heels up the wall. Good. See if you can find a little bit more of that hip flexion to find a little bit more of the anterior tilt, and then knit the lower ribs in to find, again, the neutral spine. Come out of that. Looks like you need a break. We're going to go back to it. We're going to spend a lot of time in down dog at the beginning of this, because we're going to use this as we go into more of a traditional kind of flow. So come back into downward facing dog. Push the feet into the wall. As if you were dragging the feet up the wall. Now take your feet. If you have a sideboard thing, take your heels down to the sideboard. So yes, perfect. Now push the heels into the wall. Firm the fronts of your thighs. Find the posterior tilt of the pelvis, so the cat pose, and then exaggerate the opposite, the cow pose, so tilting your hip points as if you could press them all the way to your thighs and your ribs all the way to your shins. You can't, but as if you could. And then again, find neutral. And then take your heels down to the wall. So all the way down, feet flat on the floor, if you can. And maybe you don't come all the way down. And then try this again. Push your heels this time, the backs of your heels into the wall. Firm the fronts of your thighs. Find the posterior tilt in your pelvis. Find the anterior tilt in your pelvis. And then find neutral. And if in this position your knees can't straighten, be fine with that. And come down and come into child's pose. So take a break. And yes, these things are extreme movements, and we're all at different levels of where our body can be in this moment. And so the purpose of this class is not to do down dog with a perfect spine or with hamstrings really long, heels on the floor, knees straight. The purpose is just to move a little bit, to notice like something that clicks in our minds of, oh, wow, I've never felt that before. Or, oh, wow, I do have a little bit more space. So as we move through this, just know that the purpose is never to have the perfect down dog. The purpose is to explore the body in a curious way, to be curious about movement, to be curious about what if I did this, and how when I do this, is it different? How does it change? So we're going to come back to the wall for one more down dog at the wall. It's not our only down dog, but one more at the wall. So I'm going to show you when I say mitten hands, what I mean. So normally when we do downward facing dog, we do it with hands really wide. This time we're doing it with fingers together. And we're going to place the wall in this region. So coming to the wall, thumb on the wall and fingers on the wall. Tuck your toes under. Find your neutral spine here. So notice your tendency. What is your tendency? Like some of us have a tendency to automatically like fall into extension, which is that anterior tilt, and some of us have the normal tendency to go into spinal flexion or the posterior tilt. So just notice your normal tendency and then find neutral. Like if the only thing you find in this class is, oh, that's neutral. So the ribs are knitted or corseted at the front, and we have a slight lordotic curve in our lumbar spine. We also have that thoracic kyphotic curve. So notice if you drop into your shoulders and try to find the slight rounding in your thoracic spine. Then hover your knees off the floor. Start to push your fingers into the wall as you move your pelvis into that neutral position, and then straighten your legs. Lift up onto your toes. Lift the fronts of your thigh bones to hug the thigh bones and lift the knees up. Really exaggerate first, this time, the anterior tilt. So the more you lift your knee or you lift your heel, the more space you're going to get in your hamstrings, because we don't have dorsiflexion to worry about. So lift and tilt your pelvis towards your thighs. Then bend your knees about halfway and see if you can touch your hip points to your thighs. Push the thumbs and the fingers in and turn your biceps towards the wall. Find your thoracic curve, so that's like rounding, and feel the ribs lift in and towards the midline, and then move the heels towards straight. Firm the fronts of the thighs and bring the heels towards the floor as you can. And take 2 more breaths here. Lisa, reach your head towards the floor, to the crown of your head. Yes. Reach it between your hands. Yep. So your cervical spine is part of what's inhibiting your downward facing dog. Good. All right, come down. You can rest in child's pose for a moment or two. And we are going to come back to the mat. So if you want to come back to the mat at this point, you can. So last week, the focus was on the thighs. We're taking that same awareness and including the spine in the mix. So at this point, we're going to use both of our blocks at the highest level. And however you want to come into a standing position, come all the way up. So feet are hip distance apart. Lift your toes, firm the front, press the ball mounts of the feet down, and the center of the arch of the back of your foot, press that region down. Feel the fronts of your thighs lift, roll your inner thighs back, hug your outer hips down, spread your toes. Dig your heels down. Bring your hands now on the outside of where those hip points are. Pull them back as you take your thighs back. So pause halfway and bring your fingertips to the blocks. So look down at your feet. Feet press down. Drag your right heel back. Feel the back of your thigh engage. And then do the same with the left. Bring your hands, if you can, palms of your hands to your block. Keep the legs super strong and create that posterior tilt. So rounding of the spine. Flexion of the spine with the posterior tilt of the pelvis. Then exaggerate the opposite. Firm the tops of your thighs, press them back, and find that exaggeration of your arch. Let your rib cage move down. And then define neutral. Knit the rib cage in. Take the blocks, if you can, to the next level down. So on the long edge. Press the palms of the hands down. Firm the thighs, tops of the thighs back. Keep your natural curve. Perhaps coming down to the next level, palms onto the flat portion of your block. So we're still in that neutral curve. So we still have a slight curve in our lower back. And if you can't keep that and go lower, you can still be hanging out here. Because we're not trying to get to the floor. We're trying to keep the natural curve in our lower back. So Lisa, lift up a little bit. Lift the top of your sternum towards your chin. Knit the lower ribs in. So we have a long spine. And then only coming down if you can keep the long spine. And once the hands go as low as you can, now allow for the flexion in the spine. So we're coming into now a forward fold. And there's a difference, right? There's a difference between Uttanasana, which is forward fold. The spine is in flexion. And in Ardha Uttanasana, the spine is in neutral. And if anything, it's an extension. Bend the knees, fingertips to the hip creases, and come all the way up. Shake it out. So we have two things to kind of work with as we move now through a more or less a flow, a vinyasa of focused on kind of these principles. So start at the front of your mat. Outer edges of your feet parallel. Feet can be up to hip distance apart or big toes touch. Hands beside your thighs. Find neutral in your pelvis. So notice in your standing position where your pelvis tends to move more into that anterior tilt, the exaggeration of your lower back, or the posterior tilt. And see if you can find neutral. So pubic bone is moving up towards your navel as tailbone reaches down, kind of creates that same sensation that we had lying on our back. Inhale, reach your arms over your head, look up, gaze up. Firm the fronts of your thighs. Keep your neutral spine. So as soon as you lose that natural curve of your lower back, just pause there. And then round through your spine. Hands to your shins. Keep pressing the tops of your thighs back, coming back into that neutral spine. So there is a curve in your lower back. Exhale, fold. Step back into downward facing dog. Take a moment to put these pieces together. Find the down dog that works in your body. Spine first. So if you feel you're going into that flexion of your spine, try bending your knees and being up on your toes to tilt the top of your pelvis towards your thighs. Knit your lower ribs down and in, lifting the upper core to support the mid-thoracic spine. And then if you can, keep the length of your spine, move towards firming your thighs by hugging the fronts of your thigh bones, and as if you're reaching the heels up that imaginary wall. Either staying on your left toes or lowering the heel towards the ground. Again, keep the spine. Reach your right leg up and back. Sometimes lifting the leg helps us find our spine, but sometimes we do that through opening our hip. We're not going to open our hip today. So keep the spine flat, hips in neutral. Come up onto your left toes. Draw your right knee towards your nose. Now round through your spine. So finding flexion. Keep taking your head towards your knee as you take your knee forward and step your right foot up. Drop your left knee to the ground. Grab your blocks on either side of your right foot. Come up, all the way up into this half kneeling position. Hinge your right hip back as you reach your belly out on your thigh. Try to keep your neutral spine and take your hands to the block. Bend your left hip or hinge from your left hip as you move towards straightening your right leg. Lift your right toes off the ground. Blocks come forward, bend the knee, hinge forward. Find the neutral curve in your lower back as you lift your chest up, sternum towards your chin. Keep the left toe tucked under. Start to move your left sit bone towards your heel, maybe walking the blocks back to flex your right ankle and firm your front thigh. One more time, bend the right knee, hands beside the foot, hinge into your front hip crease, lift your sternum towards your chest or towards your chin, and find the natural curve in your low back. Keep both hands on your block. Lift your back knee. Firm the front of your left thigh, lifting your hips a little higher. So find that strength and start to reach your heel towards the floor. So push the heel. As you felt with the foot on the wall during down dog, push the heel as if it's going up the wall, but it's really going towards the floor. Start to walk the blocks back as you move towards straightening your right leg. Maybe the left heel comes to the ground. Walk the blocks back a little further and flex your right ankle. So now you're on your heel. Firm the front of your thigh. Push the heel down into the floor, and as if you were dragging it towards the back of your mat. So you'll feel as you drag your right heel back that your left thigh gets stronger and moves forward. Keep pushing the heel down as well. Bring the right foot down to the ground. Press down through your blocks, coming up into that long spine. And then move into flexion, so posterior tilt. Rounding the spine as if you're pushing your spine into your hand. And then anterior tilt, exaggerating if you can. The cow pose in your spine. And then knitting the front of your ribs in to lift into a neutral spine. Press down through both of your feet. Pull or push your feet towards the other one. Reach the crown of your head forward. Reach your sternum towards your chin. Bend the right knee. Move the blocks off to the side of your mat and come back into downward facing dog. Move or be still. But this is our pose where we kind of check in. What's happening? Have you found anything that feels a little different? Are you becoming more curious? Lisa, I can see your spine and it's looking so good right now. So I just say that because if you can't feel it, I see it. You have more of the curves in your thoracic spine, and your lumbar spine is definitely moving more into that, more into towards neutral. Carla, I can't really see you, it's dark. All right. So lift up onto your toes. Press down into your hands, biceps, turn forward. Fronts of the arms or tops of the arm bones lift. Lift high up onto your toes. At the tops of your thighs, where your thigh bones meet your hip socket, press that part of your thigh bone back. So tilting your hip points forward. Allow your ribs to let go as if you were taking the crown of your head towards the floor. So exaggerating that anterior tilt and extension all the way through your spine. So we have extension in our lumbar spine, but we also have it in our mid spine. Bend your knees, create it a little bit more. Start by straightening your knees, then lifting the ribs, coarsening the front of the ribs in and towards the midline and down towards the pubic bone. Find your thoracic spine. Find neutral in your pelvis and in your lumbar spine. Start to reach your right heel towards the ground as you can and lift your left leg back up. Firm the front of your right thigh as if you're lifting the leg bone, knee bone. Lift up onto your right toes, round through your spine, shoulder shift above your wrist, and knee to nose, nose to knee. Gaze forward, step left foot up between your hands. Lower right knee to the ground. Blocks on either side of your left foot. Keep your right toe tucked under. Walk your blocks back as you send your sit bone towards your right hip. So hip flexion, point your left toes up. Drag left heel back. Walk the blocks forward and go on the opposite. So now we're going into a hip hinge in the left leg. Lift the top of the sternum towards your chest, lift your chin, find neutral in your low back. Do this 2 more times. So as we push back, we're going into flexion in our spine, right? We're going more into that Uttanasana or forward fold. And then as we hinge forward, we're going more into the down dog. We're finding flexion or extension in our lumbar spine. One more time going back. Reaching right sit bone back, allowing the spine to flex and going forward. Allowing the front of the hip to open, lumbar spine. Lift your right knee off the ground, firm the front of the thigh. So hug the leg bone. Start to reach your heel towards the floor. So as if you're pushing your heel into the wall. It won't reach the floor until maybe you straighten the left leg. Walk the blocks back, maybe lifting your left toes off the ground to push your right heel into the ground. And then move your left heel back as if it's scraping on the floor as you push your right toes forward. And then reach your right heel to the ground more. Thighs firmed. And bring the left foot down to the ground. And now moving with the spine. So pressing down into the block around the spine. Exaggerate extension throughout the spine. And then find neutral. The one thing I love about Zoom is we can look at ourselves. I don't always encourage it, but for something like this, like sometimes I feel like my spine is really straight. But if I look and I think of reaching my sternum towards my chin and reaching my sit bones in the opposite direction, I can find that axial extension of the spine that creates a little bit more of a neutral spine. Bend left knee, Take the blocks out to this side and step back into downward facing dog. And put these things into your body. So finding the leg work first. Lift high up onto your toes. Press or bend your knees first. And as you bend your knees, lift your sit bones. So create more of that anterior tilt with your knees bent, like you're trying to press your hip points into the fronts of your thighs. Keep lifting and spreading your sit bones towards the sky and apart. Now, firm the fronts of your thighs, reaching your heels towards the floor. Or if it helped when you had the heels on the wall, think of reaching the heels down the wall. Find your spine. Find your ribs. Stretch your spine. So crown of the head is reaching between your hands as your tailbone reaches in the opposite direction. How does this down dog feel? Inhale, come forward into plank. Posterior tilt of your pelvis here. So allow your lower back to round and notice what that feels like. And then do the opposite. Find the posterior tilt, which is like you're sticking your booty out. So you're not sagging your spine, you're sticking your booty up, creating a low back arch. Find neutral. So reach the heels back, firm the fronts of your thighs, ribs in. Keep this as you perhaps either lower to your knees or all the way down, chaturanga. Forehead to the floor. Feet mat distance apart, swivel your hips side to side. Bend both knees, keeping your knees mat distance apart. Now windshield wiper, one shin in front of the other. Allow your feet to come back to the floor. Big toes touch. As if you could bring your inner thighs to touch. Bring your hands behind your back and interlace your fingers or grab your opposite wrist. You can't interlace your fingers. And move your fist towards your feet. Press your pubic bone into the floor and then move it up towards your navel. Lift your feet. Lift your thighs. Lift your shoulders. Lift your head. Lift your chest. Shalabhasana. Breathe. If it helps to close your eyes, we're going to stay here for a while because we did a whole lot of hamstring lengthening and we did a lot of forward bending. We really want to counterpose this with some back bends. So punch your fist towards your feet a little bit more, maybe lifting a little higher. Lift your legs a little bit more. Take one more breath. Release, stack your hands, turn your head to either side. Shake your feet or hips side to side. Bring your forehead back to the floor. Big toes to touch, inner thighs to touch. Notice as you start to take your inner thighs to touch, how it engages your glutes without over squeezing them. Take your hands behind your hips, interlace your fingers the opposite way. Start to move your fist towards your hands. Press your pubic bone into the floor and scoop it up towards your navel. Lift your feet, lift your knees, lift your head, lift your chest. Breathe. Lift your hands off your back a little bit more and move them more towards your feet. Lift your head, lift your chest. Lift your knees. One more breath and release. One more down dog. So as we come into this final down dog, consider your first down dog. And bend your knees to the floor. Cross your ankles and sit up and back. So Shalabhasana was more of stabilizing the back of our core. You can't see me because Rush has decided this is a great time to give me kisses, but we're going into Navasana, boat pose, which, by the way, is also downward facing dog, right? Yeah. So try to recreate your down dog in this difference relationship to gravity. So where's your pelvis? Where's your spine? Where's your legs? Take one more breath, reach a little higher, maybe arms come over your head. And then completely and totally, not totally, with awareness, release to the floor. Arms wide, feet wide. Drop both of your knees to the left. Reach your right knee over towards the left front corner of your mat. We did a lot of hip flexion here, right? So this is hip extension. As well as stretching the hip flexor. Bring the knees through center and drop to the opposite side. So now left knee, you're coming to the inner edge of your left foot and actively reach your left knee towards the right tip of your mat beneath you. Come up through center. Hug both knees towards your chest. We're going into that flexion of your spine. And even round and lift your head up. Release the head down, open the knees, grab the outer edges of your feet with your fingers and send the soles of your feet towards the sky as your knees move towards the floor. So happy baby. Really our only externally hip rotated pose of the class. Two options for your final pose. You can either opt for Supta Baddha Konasana, which will continue the external rotation of the hips that we didn't have a lot of. You can do Shavasana, or if you have the wall close by, you can also do legs up the wall pose. So allowing, and I'm not on a wall, but if you're opting for this, you should be at a wall because this should be more of a restorative pose. So don't copy me on this. If you're going to do legs up the wall, make sure you're close to a wall. Otherwise, either opt for the Supta Baddha Konasana or traditional Shavasana. So the word yoga has so many meanings. The one that we probably go to the most in our mind, if you have taken much yoga, is the word union, which is the root word of yoga is to yoke. And in the history of that time from when the word yoga came into, yoking your horse to your chariot, it was connecting the chariot to the horse, to creating that union to go fight about battle. And union is where that word comes from. And that also elaborates on the meaning of yoga. That yoga is not always easy. Like when we go into battle, when we yoke our chariot to our horse, we are in an active state. And it takes discipline, and it takes awareness, and it takes the connection of your mind to the duty, what you're there to do. So today's practice, we're more or less using that definition of yoga, that we stayed connected to our physical body. We stayed aware, we stayed diligent, we stayed active in preparation. As you stay in this final resting posture, come back in that state of active mind where we're in a more passive state, and just notice what you notice. And noticing that all reactions, all responses to your practice are valid, they're real, and they're yours. And they may change. And they may be complete opposites at this time. Like you may feel frustration, but you also may feel curious and interested. And know that those are also viable feelings. Bend your knees. And roll on to your side body, taking just a moment to feel, to observe the body, mind, the breath. These are all forms of prana, of energy. We oftentimes focus on breath as our main form of prana, of energy, but all energy is prana. And using your hands up, press yourself up. And bring your hands to meet at heart center, feeling as your hands connect, your self meet self. Truly come into that space of acknowledgement. It's through this practice of yoga, of action, of awareness, of diligence, that we find that time and that space to recognize ourselves. I thank you so much. And I really went over. Namaste.